can you imagine? It's like you click on an address, you see everything that someone has. So it's not super in terms of privacy. And so we need to be very careful with this because this is money. And if you fast forward in the future, what if it's not just your ETH, but now it's your real estate deed and everything that you own, your identity, etc.
Hey everyone, quick disclaimer before we get into today's episode. Nothing said on Bell Curve is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our opinions, not financial advice. Our guests and I may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. All right, Pascal, great to have you at Digital Asset Summit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. How are we all feeling in the audience?
Yeah.
Woo! All right. We are going to be talking about institutional custody today. And I thought, Pascal, you've been such a stalwart of the industry and you've been here for so long. You've seen, you were kind of there in the very early days of crypto, and now you're at the forefront of helping secure billions of dollars worth of crypto today. So one thing that I'm very curious to get your take on is, I think one of the early tenets of crypto was, not your keys, not your coins, right? And this idea of self-custody has been at the heart of this industry for a very long time, and is still at the heart of Ledger's business today. But as we have more institutional money coming into the space, there are very different compliance and regulatory needs and different preferences. So help take us through the history of, custody, and how is this idea going to change as the industry becomes more institutional?
Okay, well, that's a great question, and I hope you have sort of 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Look, so first of all, this industry exists because of the failure of of Lehman Brothers in 2008, and Bitcoin was a reaction to that, in the sense that nobody is too big to fail, and you shouldn't put all your eggs in the same basket. And so to trust a third party is something that you don't have to do when you're in Bitcoin or crypto. You can actually hold the asset yourself, and it's been designed to do so. It's a peer-to-peer electronic payment system, right? When they started in 2008, so it's not too long ago, by the way. We're still in the infancy of this, but the use case of payment with Bitcoin is only sort of starting to bloom now, and through probably so it's not directly linked, but stablecoin has been like a great payment. Is a great payment method, and whereas with the layer 2 that is being built on Bitcoin and Lightning, etc., we can see payment with Bitcoin coming. But as we all know, the use case that really was there for a while was the new gold, the digital gold. And so using Bitcoin as a store of value. And so therefore, when you use Bitcoin as a store of value, what do you do with your private keys? And up until now, there's not much that you can do with the Bitcoin private keys apart from sending, receiving, right?
Yeah.
And so the primary use case for Ledger at the beginning was I buy a Bitcoin, I put it on my ledger, I put the ledger on the drawer, and I forget about it. Okay, which is not great because we need to upgrade the operating system from time to time, and we need to upgrade it for security reasons, etc. So to forget your ledger is not a good idea. And remember that it's a piece of consumer electronics. So if you put a piece of consumer electronic in the drawer and you excavate it like 40 years after, it's never a great idea because the world has moved on, and your consumer electronic might not be working after 40 years of not using it. But since the main use case was buy and hold, then people were like, well, if I have to buy and hold it, maybe I just need to put it at the bank. And it's funny because, for the first part of the existence of Ledger, we had to explain why not Coinbase. We were introducing Ledger to say, self-custody and digital private property, and people were saying, yeah, but what about Coinbase? Coinbase do it, and Coinbase is great. And they are great. But then you have to trust a financial institution with your coins, which sort of defeats the purpose of, not your keys, not your crypto. But again, since the only use case was buy and hold, why bother having your private keys? And I think this is how, custody started. Coinbase acquired the business of Zappo. Zappo was actually the original custodian, and Coinbase is in the custody business, and it's probably the biggest custodian today on the planet. And I think, to the extent that now it becomes a problem. It's like, the reflex is like, if I have coins and I'm an institution, I'm going to put it with Coinbase. Okay. So again, nobody is too big to fail. We have reminders every now and then that nobody's too big to fail. We have Silicon Valley Bank, we have Bybit, we have FTX, we have Celsius, I mean, you name it. And whether you fail because your business goes bankrupt or whether you fail because hackers are getting really good at what they do, it's not very good to put your eggs in the same basket. So right now we are in this world of you can keep the coins yourself, and sometimes people hide themselves behind regulation to say that they can't, but you actually can. There are many use cases, treasury management, for example, you can keep coins yourself, or you can leave them at the bank. And I think the future is both, right? And the way that we see the world is, it shouldn't make a difference in terms of security whether you want to keep them yourself or whether you want to leave them at the bank. If you leave them at the bank, they should run on a security layer that is similar to Ledger. Actually, we have Ledger Enterprise for that reason, to make sure that if you compromise on self-custody and you want to trust somebody with your coins, at least you should trust somebody that has a security layer that is the same as the one that you have if you keep the coins yourself. So that's the landscape, I think.
And what do you think, we opened this conference with a speech or a talk with David Mercer, actually from LMAX, where he was describing, there's a very different market structure in finance in crypto today, where, in somewhere like a Coinbase or a Binance or something like that, it's almost the combination of a brokerage model and an exchange and custody.
Right.
And there's potentially value for actually segregating out those different businesses within different companies for safety. And so, when you look out into the future, do you see a more tightly integrated world where these services are all bundled together in one business? Or do you see a world with separate custody, exchanges, brokerages, et cetera?
To be honest, for me, the future is not this at all, in the sense that why do we need to centralize everything? It defeats the purpose of why we're building all of this in the first place. Like, what's great about crypto is Bitcoin is not, and no offense, by the way, like Coinbase is a great business, but I'm trying to make the point of decentralization versus centralization. What's great is Bitcoin, the fact that, it's censorship resistant, the fact that it's available 24/7 everywhere, the fact that you can program on top of it, the fact that there's a layer 2 that is developed on top of it right now. That's a pretty significant move, I think, in the industry. So I'm excited by that. I feel that why do we need to build the new world, the way it was before? With segregation of duties, you have custodians on one side, you have exchange on the other, prime broker, etc. Apply or even beg for the same regulation. Please give us regulation, and please make it as hard as before. I think it's a bit ludicrous. So I believe more in decentralization. I believe more in DeFi. I believe more that, custody will be probably a mix between self-custody and custody, the way that we see it today. Like, for example, who has custody of the coins if you shard a key and, if we have like 3 shards? You have a shard, I have a shard, someone else has a shard, and the 3 of us need to sign. And with 3 different business entities, and we need to sign all the 3 to move the coins. So who's got custody? I think it's a safer world like this, because if you give custody to someone, again, nobody is too big to fail. And so when it comes to institutional custody, I'm more in favor, not in favor, but I see more the future as something that is more decentralized and banking on sort of transparency rather than centralized. Because, regulation comes when you have a black box, right? So you don't know what's in there. So, but you understand the input and the output, and regulation is here to make sure that the output is clean and the input is clean, right? Because they don't see what's in there. And so whatever you do in there, just make sure that input and output are what they're supposed to be. All these go through the window if you're open source and online and people can read the code, right? So I think that's the future.
Yeah, I think we've been talking quite a bit about regulation over the course of the last couple of days, and I think something that's a little bit challenging, especially for regulators and market participants to get their heads around, is that this is actually a huge tech upgrade to the financial system. You mentioned Bitcoin, the actual money itself is programmable. Same thing with even like Ethereum or Sol, it's much more programmable. And the existing market structure and the regulation that we have presupposes that this technology didn't exist, right? And so, a lot of the regulation could either be easier today or maybe doesn't need to exist with these improvements in technology. So for some of the folks out there who might not know, how, like things like MPC and stuff like that, talk to us about, this decentralization idea. Like, how what parts of existing regulation and market structure do we not need because we actually have a new technological solution for?
I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer just like that in detail, because probably none of the above. Like, if you look at Bitcoin, how is it regulated today? I mean, it's not. Like nobody says. I mean, is there a law in the US that says that Bitcoin has a right to exist? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's free speech. So open source code is free speech in the US. It's protected by is it the First Amendment?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it starts with that. Like, how can you cannot ban free speech, and so therefore, none of the regulation is useful in a way. And actually, the world of innovation usually thrives with the lack of regulation. I'm not saying that regulation is bad, because regulators are trying to, most of the time, they're trying to prevent from something bad happening to the public. I mean, that's and to investors, and whether they're institutional or private investors. So, I'm not saying that regulation is bad per se, but I'm just saying that if you look at the world of innovation, usually it thrives when there is no regulation, and good actors shape the future. And you try to shape the future with good businesses. The interesting thing about like an online business in general is that you're always one click away from the competitor. And so, these are the things that keep you honest. You are trying to do your best to capture value, to capture users. And if you don't do the best, and if you don't trade good value with your users, then they can go elsewhere. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think that open source code, when it comes to finance, brings the necessary transparency that has been lacking, sadly lacking for the financial industry. The financial industry is heavily regulated because it's vastly opaque. If you remove that opacity, then why is there such a strong need for regulation? The problem becomes different for me. It's like the problem becomes privacy. So actually, I think when we talk about this right now, that we're talking about something that was valid to discuss 5 years ago almost. I think the point right now is not so much centralized versus decentralized, because for me, like, it's already the proof is already in the pudding, if you like. But what about privacy? And so you cannot have a democracy if you don't have private property, and private property is based on security and privacy. If you're not secure and private, you cannot have private property. If you cannot have private property, then you cannot be free. And so I think what's happening is very fundamental, and we should worry more about privacy, because it's all like pseudonymous or anonymous, but traceable. And so now if you have your whole financial life, and I'm talking not just about a personal, like a consumer, but I'm talking also, or a citizen, I'm talking also about a financial institution. If all is online, I mean, it's great, because then it's very transparent, but there are privacy issues. That is the real concern for the future. So I think the talk about is about privacy. How can you do your financial line online, but being absolutely secure and private?
Just out of curiosity, how do people feel about the issue of privacy? Do people feel okay if every transaction over $600 is tracked and available for Treasury? It's hard for me to get a grasp on. I think people care about privacy a lot, but there's still almost this knee-jerk reaction of, well, if you have nothing to hide, why do you care? But increasingly, it feels like we're inching more and more towards a world of having almost no privacy.
But that's a slippery slope. So first of all, I'm talking about privacy in the sense of like decentralized finance, or you're online, you have a public ledger. But what about your privacy? But if you talk about privacy in the fiat world, then finally, if you have nothing to hide, why do you care that the government sees all of your transaction? Well, it's not because I've got nothing to hide that I want you to know about what I'm talking about with my sister. Like, it's perfectly okay. I assure you, I'm not breaking any laws, but you don't need to know. And that's my privacy, because we all have secrets, and it's not because you have a secret that you're a criminal. And so therefore, no, you don't need to know what I'm buying with my $600. Like, if it's a TV, or if it's a phone, or if it's bread, etc. And you shouldn't assume a criminal activity to take away my freedom. It's like, well, prove to me that you're not a drug dealer. It's like, why would I do that? Like, I'm not a drug dealer. Like, who's the drug dealer in the room? Who's a terrorist?
No hands?
No hands? No show of hands? Okay, I'm surprised.
High quality attendees at DAS.
Yeah, like-
very few terrorists, very few.
So we have to be very careful because this is the World Economic Forum that says, well, you got nothing to hide. So why, or why do you need to own something? It's okay. Well, no, it's not okay because I need to own something because it's my private property and so therefore it's mine. And and it's okay. If you want to rent everything for the rest of your life, go do it. It's fine, but you need to have the choice, okay? And so the choice is this. And so I think privacy is extremely important. There is a story actually that is a cautionary tale because all these things happen and we don't notice. But Apple made exactly that decision. So what you may or may not know, who's got an iPhone? Okay, so everybody. So do you know that Apple had a backdoor into your iPhone like 2 summers ago just to check all of your pictures? Did you know that? Okay, 1 person, 2 people, okay, not, so most of you didn't know. Okay, so they did that for the greater good because they wanted to check if you're not a pedo. And it's funny because they wrote an internal memo to say, we are on the right side of history, we need to track those pedophiles, etc. And, who's going to disagree with that? That's for the greater good. The problem being that they suddenly had a backdoor in your phone that, of course, hackers can use to then do other things.
Yeah.
And also, if they can do that, what else can they do? And so there are other ways to track pedophiles. That's a crime, and we should 100% go after them. But there are many other ways to do it. And if the way to do it is to sacrifice everybody's freedom and everybody's privacy in the sake of, finding the 0.01% of the population that commits crime, I think it's too much to sacrifice for the 99.9 law-abiding citizens. And so we need to be very careful with these big ideas and very generous. It's like, well, but who likes a terrorist? Okay, nobody likes a terrorist. But equally, I don't want to be treated as one every time I want to do something. And so what's interesting now with the future and with decentralized finance is we don't need to, I think KYC in Europe is 150 billion a year, just to KYC everyone. I mean, that's crazy stupid. And by the way, do we see less drugs? No. Do we have less terrorist attacks? Okay, maybe, but we still have. And so it's not super efficient, okay? Terrorist organizations are still functioning well. Drug organizations are functioning super well. So there's obviously something that we're doing that is not working and that costs a lot of money. So I would take the 150 billion. I would invest in a cyber police force. I would invest in a cyber army to catch the criminals. Because if you ask me, do I want to catch the criminals? Yeah, if you're criminal, I think you should be caught, and we should have a police for this, and that's okay, but not to the expense of our global freedom.
I agree. So in our closing, couple of minutes here, Pascal, what is the, help land the plane on what is the role of crypto? How does that play into this future of privacy? Because I actually think if we're being a little self-critical, I think that's an area that we've failed a little bit thus far, both ideologically to prioritize it, which is very difficult, right? I mean, in governments across the world, even it seems like that's actually an area where everyone agrees that we're getting less and less, especially financial privacy, but also technologically, right? Like all of the transactions on major L1s, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, they aren't private, right? So there's actually a design challenge that we're facing here. So, when you look out into this world, and I think we want a world where there is more financial privacy, what role does crypto play there?
No, I think you asked the question, you framed the question in the right way, and it is, and that's, I was saying this, like, privacy is the issue going forward, and sometimes in the discussion that we just had, like, is the discussion, like, why do you want to hide something? I don't want to hide something. My privacy is a right, and so therefore there is tension now, huge tension. Sorry, because what crypto really is this way for people to exchange value together directly, and so that's a real novelty. And those digital assets that can be yours, that's a real novelty. So we need to sort of reinvent everything that goes around it, and including privacy. Right now, we've been sacrificing privacy for 2 reasons. One, because it's cool. I mean, crypto is fun. So people like to show their stuff and like, this is my ETH address, etc. But can you imagine? It's like you click on an address, you see everything that someone has. So it's not super in terms of privacy. And so we need to be very careful with this because this is money. And if you fast forward in the future, what if it's not just your ETH, but now it's your real estate deed and everything that you own, your identity, etc. Do you want to dox yourself online like this? I think you should not. But there is a bit of a catch-22 because now if you're trying to hide things, then people say, why are you hiding? Are you a terrorist? So we are a bit in that moment where we need to redefine philosophically how we think about freedom, how do we think about security, how we think about privacy. It is not an easy problem. It's a very difficult one. The good news is technologically, we have the bricks that we need in order to do what we want to do. Zero knowledge proof, for example, I probably live with that example in terms of technology brick that is helpful. I can prove to you that I'm 18, but nothing else. And I think that's powerful because, if you think about online porn, for example, it's not great the way that you prove that you're 18. Are you 18? Obviously, yes. And so that's terrible for the young generation because that's what they watch growing up, and I think it's terrible. And so if you could prove with certainty that you're 18, but also, if you're above 18, it's perfectly legal, and I don't want to tell you much more about my identity, then you should be able to do that. Tomorrow with a ledger, you'll be able to do that exactly. I will share with you what I need to share. I'm 18, and that's it.
I love that. Well, Pascal, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for doing this, guys.
Thank you.
Give Pascal a big round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.